Welcome to the Healthy Home Show. We are your hosts, Fernanda Furman. I'm a healthy home architect.
I'm Eric Furman. I'm a healthy home contractor.
And today we're here talking to Paula Baker-Laporte. Hi, Paula. How are you?
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here, and I'm just fine.
Yeah. So we're going to talk to Paula about EcoNest and EcoNest buildings. I'm going to start by reading her biography, and then we're going to jump into the questions. So Paula, she is the co-founder of the EcoNest Homes. She was hailed by My Natural Home magazine in 2005 as one of the top 10 green architects in the U.S. Paula leads the EcoNest design team. She was graduated from the University of Toronto School of Architecture in 1978 and from the International Institute of Biology and Ecology in 1995. In 2007, she was elected into the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects. She headed a wide-ranging architectural practice based in Santa Fe, New Mexico since 1986. And since 1992, Paula has dedicated her practice to the precepts of environmentally sound and health enhancement architecture, and her firm continues to lead in the fields of healthy and natural design and design consultation for the chemically sensitive. She has been the principal architect at EcoNest Architecture in Ashland. And Paula has also lectured, taught, and published extensively on the topic of healthy and ecological design. She's currently developing and teaching courses for the International Institute of Biology and Ecology, and she's the primary author of Prescriptions for a Healthy House. She also is a contributor to many and several books. Together with her husband, Robert Laporte, she co-directs the EcoNest Natural Building Seminars and Workshops. Oh, wow. That's a very diverse background.
Yeah. It's a long background.
Yeah. So one of the things for us that's very important, that's why it's very important to have you here, Paula, is that you not only you have the concept of a healthy home, but you also have the background as an architect and your husband as a builder. So that brings a lot of knowledge into the plate. And I think a lot of our audience, they really are looking for some answers when it comes to building a healthy home. What's the first step? What to do? And I think your knowledge will be very valuable for our audience.
Hope I can help a lot of people. Thank you.
Absolutely. One of the things as I was reading through what you guys do, and I'm really interested in, and I think it's very different from what we've been hearing, is the construction materials that you guys have been using, such as the straw and the clay. I was going to say Adobe, but it's different than Adobe even. I'm wondering I'd really like to get deep into that aspect of the home because I think it's pretty unique. So could you explain some of that to us? Like, how did you guys come up with this and the things that you're doing now?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to make some distinctions about a healthy home and why people need them. And as many reasons as there are to have a healthy home, there are different approaches. And for some of my clients who are either living in a very wet climate, where there's not a long drying season, where we would not use wet materials, or who are very hypersensitive to even natural materials. I don't always do clay and straw housing or designs, but everything that we do is based on the principles of building biology. And so we use mass walls with dynamic insulation and just simple finishes on the inside and the outside. So the biggest thing that we're doing that is different is non-conventional methods of building for this country. In Europe, and as far as memory stretches, they have been doing what we call non-conventional building, and they have buildings that are hundreds of years old that attest to its longevity and health.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the same thing in Brazil. We use Adobe. That's one of the classes we had in architecture school. We had to build a home that was, using Adobe. And we have seen here in America, when I moved here, it was a very hard transition for me in architecture and learning how the buildings are put together.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that what we see in your approach is that you use a very unique way of building. And
Mm-hmm.
for people that are looking for, to build a house that will actually, as you said, you will withstand the time, but also it's a healthier, type of building. What are your principles? Like, what are the key ingredients or building materials that you guys would start with?
Well, as I mentioned before, the wall systems that are typically used in North America, light frame construction, have they're very challenging. And as it turns out, there's so many building failures that have caused illness in this country. That and the way we heat, forced air heating. I'd say if you combine those two things, which are 99% of the homes in this country are built with light frame walls and forced air heating, you will find that once someone becomes sensitive, like you, Fernanda, or myself, most of those homes are not acceptably healthy enough environments. Now, there's much you can do to create, if you live in a light frame home, a conventional home, to create a healthier environment. But if I have a choice of starting from scratch and I'm working with someone who's sensitive, I know I have a much greater chance of long-lasting success when we look at the building materials and the mechanical systems of the building very closely, and instead of using conventional methods, use time-tested alternatives.
What are some of those time-tested alternatives when you have an existing framed home that you could maybe change, like from a mechanical and energy efficient modern home? Like, how can you bring some of those elements back into the home potentially?
Well, I believe you can make a building that's non-toxic using conventional materials. I would like to talk a little bit about beyond non-toxic to health nurturing, because I think that's the leap that it's certainly where I want to work. So maybe we could talk about building biology a little bit, and one of the primary goals is the realization that nature is the gold standard for healthy human environment. Yeah. So we evolved in nature, and there are complexities in nature, as we're finding out in every field, that as humans we're not quite smart enough to have a holistic enough approach to understand all of those components. So if using nature as our gold standard, we want to create walls. Look at in nature, do you ever find a moldy animal's den? Mm-hmm. Somehow, even though they're using cellulose materials, they're working with nature. And so that's the first principle in the walls that we build, is to go with the flow, to have enough capacity within that wall to handle any of the conditions that nature's going to throw at it without deteriorating. At the time when building biology was first established, or biobiology, in Europe, one of the first things they noticed about the buildings that were failing was that they had a vapor barrier on them. They didn't allow for the free flow of moisture through them. And of course, when you're using conventional materials, fluffy insulation and a lot of materials of the layers in that wall, you need to protect them from natural vapor intrusion. But if you can create a wall that doesn't need that protection, that can dry out, get wet, dry out, and allow for this free flow of vapor, you would not be seeing those hidden mold problems that we're finding all over the place inside conventional walls. So that was a lot all at once. The takeaway is maybe we should reconsider how we're building our homes. So if anyone has the option of building from scratch, let's look at what the alternative wall systems are. And I've worked with a variety of systems, some Adobe, having worked in Santa Fe, and the light straw clay we're working with. There are also very good other solutions. Solid timber walls are incredibly robust and comfortable. I'm also working with aerated autoclaved concrete, which is a puffed up mineral wall that has insulation and mass combined together. You just can plaster the inside, plaster the outside. So simple wall systems. I'm also working with a block called Faswall, which is it's like a concrete block, but it has an insulation sleeve, and it's 95+% recycled wood chip. So all of these are good solutions that are available to us.
So we saw that you have worked in 17 different states.
Mm-hmm.
So you have experience with the laws and the codes for those, different states.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like those materials are materials that even the building department would be aware of and, be okay to accept? Do you feel like the code would be a problem or like a challenge, or what would be driving people to choose different materials?
I think there are definitely more and less challenging climates, and they're hot and cold. You need to look what region you're in, and not even though we use conventional frame in every single climate with houses that look just about the same, there are clues with each climate. In a hot climate, a hot, dry climate, mass plays such a good role, especially if there's a big temperature swing from day to night. Whereas in a colder climate, something like wood is a much more comfortable and insulative material. So it depends where we are. It also depends on the individual person. As you may know, people who are sensitive, some are sensitive to wood. Some could not be around straw. So it varies. Some of the materials, like aerated autoclave concrete or the Faswall, or there's other companies, wood insulated concrete forms, are very adaptable through a huge range of climates and authorizing bodies. So we work very hard to get light straw clay and into the code, as have straw bale people work to get that into the code. So we're in the national code now, international code, but it still can be, especially in many parts of the country, an uphill battle, whereas a block material is much more acceptable. So weighing all of these things, we have to come across the right solution for the right location and for the special needs client.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys have seen now they are accepting, for example, as an insulator, the straw inside of a wall. My first thought is, oh my goodness, what is the flame retardant type of natural capabilities of that material? So, it seems like it's actually pretty low as far as the flammability.
Yes, all of the natural systems that I mentioned, solid wood will simply char, it won't go up in flames. So all of these are far better than any kind of hollow wall conventional 2x system in fire regions. All of them.
Mm-hmm. In earthquake states where we are, I know that's why we don't have things like basements generally, and why they have gone with the wooden structured homes. Not like where she's talking about from Brazil, where they have different codes for building stone type of buildings. Are there any other options that we would have that you've seen for like an earthquake type of state with the codes that would,
All of the systems I mentioned and others have been, I've done several personally in California,
Right.
and they can be engineered for earthquake.
Oh, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so could you talk to us a little bit about the principles of the building biology?
Yes, so I'll give you a little background. As architect to architect, I had the same awakening as you did. For me, it was a house I lived in the early 80s that was new, and it was full of formaldehyde. And it took me 10 years to find out what was wrong with me. And how I found out was my doctor got sick in her clinic, and we were in the middle of doing a house for her. So that was my co-author of the book, Prescriptions for a Healthy House, Erica Elliott, Dr. Erica Elliott, who does nothing but specialize in people with various compromised immune systems. And so that was an awakening for both of us. And at that time, I realized I thought I was going to have to give up being an architect, because I realized every time I went on a new construction site, I got really sick. I was finally making the link between the chemicals in my environment and my health, which had been a mystery for almost a decade. And then I realized that no, it's not that I'm special. It's just that I'm symptomatic to the toxics that are used everywhere in the construction trades, in conventional construction. That, having realized I do have a career and that this was important work, I started to research, and I came across something called building biology. And this was a school, a whole body, really a philosophy that came out of Germany post-World War II. And you may recall what happened in Germany was they did mass building with all these newly industrialized materials post-World War II. And people got sick en masse. Up until that time, it was thought that these chemicals really wouldn't hurt our health. And so they got smarter, faster, and earlier than we did. And the difference between what I learned there and what we are now doing with our green building systems has stuck with me for the last 30 years. The bottom line is that nature knows. Nature is the gold standard. And how do we bring nature into our environments? You know, even people are pinning up pictures of vegetation and calling it biophilia, are realizing people feel better. But building biology goes further than that. It says, no, make your environments natural. Find out what's ticking out there, moderate it, and bring it in here. And sounds complex, and it is for us mere humans and people in the profession, but there's a magic when you introduce natural materials into a home.
Absolutely. It's so funny because in a modern world, to mechanically do all of these things, what happened to us in our journey, it's so funny. Like, you know exactly what we're talking about, and believe it wholeheartedly, because that's what happened to us. Is all of the toxins in our home, all of the things that we were trying to solve, just by bringing fresh air into the house, literally wiped out every single problem that we were having with our home.
Yes.
It's just like, you know, like the daily headaches and sneezing and the fatigue, the low energy.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, the way I was working. And some people, as you're saying, like you're affected. I was mostly affected the most because I'm the one that stayed home, worked from home. Eric would get out of the house and he would work out of the house all day. Kids go to school and I'm here inside of the house the whole time, in a new remodeled home with new dual panel windows, dual panel doors, and a new air conditioner, and everything, all the formaldehyde from the glues, from the paint, from the furniture, all recirculating while I'm inside of the house.
Yes.
Do you know what was the source or the major source of formaldehyde that was bothering you?
I similarly was living in something brand new, and in those days, Formaldehyde was in everything. There was carpeting, there was drapery, there was furniture, there was mattresses, there was cheap, plywood, urea formaldehyde-based plywood. So it was just too high a level for this human being. Other human beings in the same environment didn't seem to be affected at all.
Yeah.
We're fortunate now that we have so many more things available thanks to the green building movements, thanks to LEED, that are formaldehyde free.
Yeah.
We've made progress, but we've also been known to make foolish substitutions, substituting something we know is toxic for something we simply don't know anything about yet. The bottom line is we know very little about a whole host of chemicals, about the fire retardants that are being poured into buildings that are not helping. They're making firefighters sick when they do burn, and they do burn, and that they're finding in dust particles in every home. So, the green building movement knows about VOCs. It's not talking about semi-volatile organic compounds or any of these other chemicals that don't make people like myself and Farinanda sick on contact, but they cause reproductive problems and cancers 20 years down the line. So,
yeah, it's the overexposure, especially because nowadays almost everything we use contains toxic, right? Chemical ingredients like the deodorants, the body lotions, the perfumes, the desk, so there's so many small amounts that we are exposed to daily that all those things, and everybody's bucket is, a different size, as you're saying, Paula. For me and you, that affected us, but for Eric and the kids and my mom, it didn't affect them, or at least not in the way that they were, showing symptoms.
Yes, I've come to peace with the fact that when we help someone who's chemically sensitive or mold sensitive, environmentally sensitive in any way, we're actually helping the whole family. Even if, and wellness is not the absence of illness either. There's a wellness that you feel. Picture yourself walking on an ocean, sandy beach, or in a pine forest, or out in nature, and there's a wellness that you experience that's different than simply not feeling sick. And in our homes, we tend to settle for simply not feeling sick. And for some, unfortunately, even that would be a dream come true, to just not feel sick. Yeah. What various forms of natural building and building biology, the promise it holds is to feel truly well by respecting the laws of nature.
Just love what you just said, because that really brought me to that place where I just got used. First of all, I got used to feel sick, and then just not feeling sick, it's already like a huge thing for me. But what is the next step, which is having that feeling of the whole wellness, not just not feeling sick. And I love what you just said, because that's something that I was not even thinking about as the next step.
That's what I have loved about building biology. It's a scientific inquiry into what makes that fresh air. Not only does it make us feel better, but it elevates us. So then we can say, what's the ion count in that air? No one is counting ions, but when we fill an environment with plastic, all the negative ions cling to the plastic. It's a static electricity. So when you're in an environment and you're touching a door handle and getting a shock, you're also depriving yourself of vitamin air, or I don't know what we call it, but these nutrients that exist in nature that we're killing in our indoor environments needlessly, just through ignorance.
Absolutely. And then we've become, for whatever reason, safety, convenience, lifestyle, we're part of this indoor generation now where we're spending a tremendous amount of time indoors that we never did before. I don't even remember being in my house growing up. I was always out in a field somewhere playing.
Yes, yes, so many of us.
Now, what are the key principles of a building biology? Like when that certification for some of our audience. We're going to have people here that are, you know, going to architecture school and they want to make a difference. And I think that's a first, you know, good place to go, and it's to learn the principles of building biology. I learned a lot just by visiting their website.
Yes, there's a lot of information. We should maybe give out that website, but it's the Building Biology Institute. Is it bbi.org, perhaps?
Yeah, the link is going to be on the page.
Okay, let's include the link. One thing that's very exciting to me, I've been hoping for this. I've been on the faculty there for many years, and it's kind of my give back, you know, or pay it forward, I guess, having experienced illness and then having again this tremendous gift of wellness. So many people go there because, like you and me, Farinanda, they're sick. No one in the no one knows what they're going through. You know, you look fine, and no one even believes them. And suddenly, you know, this is like a fellowship of people studying for the same. And recently there has been interest, and we've found a way to adapt some of the coursework to architecture schools, community college, and we have there's a pilot program. We're going to go up there and teach in this summer in Ottawa, Ontario. Algonquin College has taken it on for their curriculum for their interior design students. So this is exciting because when I got sick and had my come to my maker meeting with myself, I realized that in my entire architectural education, health was never discussed. It was just assumed that what we did didn't matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and yeah, I never study anything in terms other than just comfort, sound, lighting, you know, location of the building. And I think this is a very important discussion to have in schools today, because our habits have changed. The way that people are feeling sicker every day, it's been alarming. And there's not enough doctors that understand the building to actually pinpoint to what's causing that. So I think that that's a great program, and I think we all could benefit from architects and builders. Like you guys have a workshop that you teach builders how to use the principles to create healthy homes.
Yes.
So in the building biology, it has like, it touches the air, it touches the water, EMF, comfort, right?
Yes, it's a holistic approach. Building biology has been multidisciplinary from the very beginning. And so in a typical class, we will have a couple of architects, a couple of engineers, some builders, a psychologist or two, medical professionals, naturopaths, MDs, few people straggling in from Europe to get the information in English. So, and many people who are either very sick themselves or who have family members who they want to find solutions. So when that all comes together with all of these different walks of life, there's a lot of interdisciplinary discussion which goes on. And, you know, we didn't get this way or into this situation. I think, let's put it this way, I think we got there by isolation. Doctors were no longer doing house calls. So how do they know if their client's house smells like mold or, you know, and, you know, architects and builders and engineers are all talking different languages. Instead of someone growing up in the building trades and learning a more holistic approach to building, we're now divided into various subcontractors who may never see each other on the job site, and it's where their junctions are that the failures occur. So
Absolutely.
Holism is what I think is one of the answers. And the fact that you're bringing together medical people and architects and other walks of life to share their expertise, you are taking that approach, and I laud it.
And thank you. One of the things that I see a lot too is like working with high-end architecture. And I was working with a, very well-known architect here. But one of the challenges being married to Eric, who is a mechanical contractor, and I see his challenges on the field where he's the last one to, to be called in the job, and people don't take indoor air quality seriously. So what happens is a lot of times he doesn't have enough room or enough space to build a system that it's, the right system for that house.
Yes.
And even trying to create that conversation with the architects, it's like the design comes first and the aesthetics of the building comes first. And I feel like now with this new, with the building biology and with this new conversation shifting, I feel like the design is very important. And I'm not saying it's not, but including the other trades from the beginning is also very important.
Absolutely. And I'm finding more and more on the consulting work we do, we're usually called in because an owner is ill and no one in their area has experience. And so we become a part of a team. And for working with someone who is already compromised, it takes a team. And so our mechanical people are called in from the very beginning. But getting this out to the general public is part of the goal here. And so that everyone thinks about their health and from the beginning and says, how can we work? How can we create a creative team around us so we can have the beautiful aesthetics, but also the things that are more than skin deep that will affect our daily sense of how we feel.
Absolutely. I think we're hearing so many of these common themes, get to these things early on if possible. Unfortunately, as human nature goes, we wait until it's kind of too late and we're on our deathbed, so to speak, health-wise, before we actually do something. So yeah, it's good that this is coming out. Some of it's becoming code. It's really great that you guys have already been doing this, and it's interesting to hear in your classes and meetings, you do have this wide array of different types of people, from doctors to even said psychologists. It's fascinating. So it's great to see that it's happening.
And with the building biology, when somebody's hiring, let's say an architect, right? So let's say our audience right now, they wanted to start building or remodeling their home, and they want to get better choice. They want to make better choices. What is the best place for them to go? It's to go into the building biology website or doing a search for green architects. How would they find professionals that could help them?
The building biology site has a find an expert. Often people don't know what expertise they need. So if someone is building from scratch, the first assessment should be, what is the land? What's upstream? What are the sounds? What are the pollutants? What are the energetics of the site? What is the electromagnetic radiation hitting the site? So all of these things, once a property is purchased, you got to work with what you've got. But if someone is awake from the very beginning, then they start looking for their property based on health. And for myself, when I'm working as a member of a team, there are several experts that are called in. Besides, what we help people do is understanding the material selections and the process of how do you test something if someone's sick to know if they're good or not. So that whole area. But I will usually, and our general specifications talk about doing things for electromagnetics in terms of household wiring, the things a builder can do. But taking site measurements and inspecting for correct wiring and filtering as needed, all of that, I always call in an electromagnetic radiation specialist. Sometimes we send things to very specific labs to get testing done. I like to call in a mechanical specialist from the beginning as well, because often good filtration will make the difference between someone being able to regain their health or not.
I have a question about that. You had mentioned earlier, I believe maybe that was one of the things that made you sick, but what are the disadvantages of forced air heating versus, I saw on your website, you guys are leaning more towards a radiant type of a heat.
Yes.
Can you explain those differences and pros and cons of those?
Yes. I'd like to start with the caveat that forced air can be much better than it is throughout most houses. In many cases, the forced air system itself is the cause of illness.
Mm-hmm.
So as a building biologist, let's do a little inquiry. Have you ever been out in the sun on a cold day?
Yes.
And the sun is hitting you, even though the air is kind of cold, and you feel marvelous?
Yes.
Why is that?
The sun is radiating its heat into my body.
It's a form of radiant heat.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, building biology says, well, how does nature heat and how can we move that to the indoors? So heating up air and then blowing that on people has a lot of drawbacks. The first one, it should be obvious to any energy expert, is that air is an insulator. So we're heating up an insulator and then surrounding ourselves with that heated air. It usually dries air out too much. And introducing mechanical moisture is, I don't recommend it because you can get mold. It's noisy. If you live without forced air heating and then have to stay in an environment with forced air heating, it's barbaric. This is part of what Europeans complain about when they come over here. The comfort level, especially if you're working with mass materials, once you heat up that mass, the level of evenness and comfort is outstanding. When you're blowing air in, you don't get even heat. And again, being spoiled by having radiant heat for the last 3 decades of my life, I'm either too hot or too cold. It's noisy, it's dry. If it's not a perfect system, it's blowing dust, maybe mold, maybe chemicals are just getting blown around. So that's just that's scraping the surface of why I recommend radiant heat as a first way to go.
I've experienced it and both, and I wholeheartedly agree that yes, radiant heating is a much more comfortable heat and it solves a lot of the problems that you mentioned. Now, one of them is, as everyone talks about, you don't want to introduce more problems. So you've got electrical radiant heat that could potentially do more electrical EMF type problems. And then you've got more tried and true water-based radiant type of heat. Which one would you recommend as far as a really well-designed radiant heat system?
So first is to design a building that might not be up to our standard of comfort, but you're not going to die if the system goes down.
Got it.
Which is, that's big news for most of the country, frankly. Then secondly, I would go with radiant heat. And we actually use masonry ovens a lot, which are, don't recommend it for everyone who's highly sensitive, but it's always worked for me. We light 1 fire a day for about an hour in an oven that weighs 4,000 pounds made out of soapstone in a central location. So we also have radiant heat in the floors, but we don't use it. It's kind of there for resale since we build our own homes for ourselves. And it's radiant heat in the floor is quite good. Better still would be radiant heat in the walls. And there are several European systems, but it has not taken, it's not, I like to say, yet become popular in the US, but that is I think the healthiest, most comfortable form of radiant heat, other than potentially something like a masonry heater that one could have.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as air conditioning, which is really popular here, especially now, with the increased humidity, even where we're at, I mean, probably the majority of our customers over the last few years are people that never had an air conditioner, now getting an air conditioner. What are some of the, I know them, but I would love to see on your end what you have seen as far as introducing ill health from an air conditioner into a home as well.
There's actually quite a bit documented about that, and we can maybe include some links. But when you think about it, we've been adding fire to our homes since caveman days. But the first mechanical air conditioning was, I think I don't have the dates, but Mr. Carrier invented something. It was for keeping humidity out of a printing press, I believe. And that's a very recent discovery.
Yeah.
So we went from something that could finally temper our environment for comfort to something that we now are dependent on as a lifeline. If, as you know, if electricity went out in Phoenix, Arizona in the middle of the summer, people would die.
Yeah.
Because we have not built buildings that are robust enough to keep them safe through the hot season. So we know how to do it. There are many examples in a lot of the Arab countries, the African countries, where they're relatively comfortable indoors in incredibly hot environments. So again, the first thing is what do you build your shell? How do you build your shell to withstand heat, or to withstand the heat from outside? And then is there a way do we really need as much? I mean, that's the whole story with all of this. Do we need all that we're taking from the environment? The energy used on air conditioning is going to far surpass what we use in heating worldwide in the near future as countries like India develop. And it's just an energy hog. So how cool do we need to be productive? For myself, the human body will temper itself. And if we are more moderate in our approach, we don't need to cool as much. So reducing the need is number one. And then if we do have it, the obvious things are, how do we introduce it so that it's not blowing cold air on us? Mm-hmm. We're experimenting with radiant cooling now. I have European clients who've used it who want it again in their new houses. And it's working well in environments like Santa Fe. So we're going into that as a potential option. But again, the bottom line is do as much as you can with the envelope, invest in that so that you consume less.
Yeah, one example of that is, I remember back in Brazil, which is very hot, there was a client that I went to do a remodel for them, and they were saying, oh my gosh, my house is so hot. It's incredibly hot in our house, and I don't know why. So when we looked, all the windows in the house were placed on the side of the door. So there was no cross ventilation. Yes. The house never got fresh air because all the windows and doors were placed, side by side, because the contractor just built without any plans, without anything. They just thought, well, we know how to build a house, so we're just going to build it. And I think that's what you're telling us is so important, because the planning, it's one of the most important things. And even though sometimes people think it costs a little bit more upfront, but on the long run, it's actually saving you money on cooling, on heating, and also in medical bills, right?
Yes, and in comfort and in ecology. Yeah, so there are many compelling reasons to re-examine our whole mechanical way we conduct ourselves in a holistic way, and have a win-win-win situation in doing that.
Yeah, so valuable, everything that you shared with us. Thank you so much, Paula.
Well, thank you for having me.
Do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to leave with, the audience that you think they would benefit from learning today?
What I've seen sometimes I feel like I've spoken to every person who's gotten ill for the last 30 years. And I've seen a serious trend, and I think we need to take it very seriously. In the beginning, it was mostly women of a certain age who got sick. The vast majority, their husbands were fine. They thought their wives were crazy. They had no idea and weren't really, and I've seen that now our situation is our children who are being born on the spectrum or with immunity dysfunctions so I think that alone has made more people conscious of the problem. And it's really time that medical professionals and building professionals got more together and forged solutions.
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree with you. And there is a couple, that their story is very, like, it's a story of a lot of families right now, and their kid got really sick, went to the doctor and was an aspirator and allergies, asthma, and the doctor said, hey, he's going to be like this for the rest of his life. Well, they didn't accept that diagnosis, and what healed their kid, it was changing the carpet in the house. They removing the carpet in the house.
Yes.
His kid went like totally healthy, and no more aspirators, no more drugs. And so that's one of our passions. We have 2 little kids, 4 and 7, and we do include them in the conversation. So they are learning by listening, by, making informed decisions about things that when they make choices, like my 7-year-old said, Mom, we're not eating fish because, they're full of microplastic. So that really, empowering them, it's going to make a huge difference for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
So, yeah, thank you so much. And Paula has a gift for you, and all the links are going to be below the video. So you can just click, and all of her information is going to be there too if you want to connect with her. The website is going to be down below the video. And thank you so much for watching us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.